So let's do reconvene, though, because this is a very important presentation that we want to hear, and it's from our leader, the leader of this whole CyberGIS initiative, the lead PI of the NSF-funded CyberGIS project that all of us are involved in. Shaowen Wang, I'm going to also follow his lead and not take the time to introduce all of his wonderful accomplishments. He is a very young professor who is already a full professor at the University of Illinois. He already has a very distinguished career, and we can see the many evidences of that in terms of his affiliations on the screen, so you get an idea just there of how much he is involved not only in CyberGIS, but reaching into urban planning and other social sciences, reaching into other domain sciences, and again, this is why we are all here. So he's going to take some time to give us the state of CyberGIS, which he often does at these meetings, and this is not a repeat presentation. There's always something new in what Shaowen shares with us, and so we're going to give him about 40 minutes or so to go into that, and then that will lead into our paper presentation, which will talk about the applications of this CyberGIS world. So I'm very honored and very pleased to introduce to you Professor Shaowen Wang.
Thanks so much, Dawn, for the kind introduction. I'll directly delve into the presentation, and as I would love to mention, this is a fantastic team, as I was alluded to earlier, so I'm presenting this set of work really based on the work done by this group. To leverage what Amy shared this morning with us, a simple definition of CyberGIS would be geographic information science and systems based on advanced cyber infrastructure. My apologies for overusing some buzz terms here, but alternatively, we could perhaps define CyberGIS in a more simpler manner, which would be an integration approach to big data, compute, and collaboration for solving complex big problems in the geospatial context. If this is easier to grab, go ahead with this definition, and I'll perhaps use this as an index to the rest of my talk. So why CyberGIS? This basically is pulled by tremendous opportunities and challenges, as Jack was describing in a very nice way this morning, for geospatial discovery and innovation, and pushed by rapid advances, especially in the past decade or so, in the arena of advanced digital technologies. As CyberGIS has emerged in the middle, there are a lot of similar terms, related terms, but it's representing a digital geospatial ecosystem. Specifically, with regard to geospatial discovery and innovation, this was also already mentioned in Jack's talk. Geodesign as an example, we're really looking to GIS for capabilities and the support beyond cartographic mapping when GIS was initially created for, and even personal services. With regard to the major rethinking of GIS now moving to CyberGIS, we see not only we're curious about patterns, which maps are really powerful for, but also processes that are ultimately enabled by simulations, such as done through the big computers. And we also see the trend of combining quantitative and qualitative approaches, and we see data increasingly include temporal dimensions. And space and place now intertwined. We used to be very serious about region measurements. Now it's also interest in vague representation of place. And on the bottom pushing side is advanced digital technologies. Jack, I think, mentioned also Moore's law, which are hitting. There's, in fact, a recent Nature article by a University of Michigan researcher on Nature talking about how to break out the limits, because we are now getting to the atomic level of putting transistors on chips. It's already at that level. Parallelism is a strategy to approach that limit, to increase performance. So we used to be studying GIS algorithms to just speed up operations. Now this becomes a reality. We need to rethink about GIS algorithms on top of parallel computer architecture, because that's the way it is. And many, many mobile devices challenging us in the scalability And of course, this is very much a service-oriented world. You've heard mashups and all these services coming into play, and the clouds backending the services. So we are facing a world of extreme scale, not only computing, but also information and communication systems. So we're getting challenged by understanding what scalability means in the new world of CyberGIS. Blue waters, Amy mentioned this morning, and you see the kind of configurations of such a big computer system, you might be curious, well, why do I need to bother? This device has about the computing power about 10 years ago of a supercomputer. So if we see the parallel computer architecture going to continue in 10 years, your desktop, your devices would have this computing power. And I don't think we're ready yet for basic algorithms and utilities within CyberGIS to take advantage of this new computing paradigm. And you see this is a machine with 1.5 petabytes memory that could load up 300 million your iPhone pictures simultaneously, and hundreds of thousands of cores. You need to understand how to employ them efficiently, simultaneously. And again, if you look at the future, the systems are coming. We're approaching exascale. So the blue waters is at a petascale. Before 2020, we're approaching exascale, which is 1,000 times faster. This is only numerical performance. We're not yet talking about the data access performance. Again, if you imagine in 10 years, your laptops will have the power of blue waters, what would you do with it? And how would you do with it, right? Is your algorithms going to be ready? And well, this is the architecture for such big systems to come into play. And again, we're not only in the computing information and communication environments in a cyber sense, but in reality, we're blurring between geospatial world and the cyber world. I think GIS has a major role to play to help bridge that gap, but also to facilitate the interactions between the cyber and the geospatial worlds. I want to share with you a little bit of CyberGIS history. This is a very personal view, obviously, inevitably a biased view. This is a presentation I gave 2003 at AAG, talking about this integration aspect of CyberGIS in a new world of scalable computational information and communication systems. What this means from the basic resources, cyber resources and services, to advanced spatial analysis modeling. So what's involved in between? So that was early attempt to try to picture this out. Again, this is not exhaustive literature review by any means. Just give you a trace how this came about. In 2005, we were able to put together this online functional environment for engaging distributed high-performance computational resources to enable computationally intensive spatial analysis. And this is something familiar to some of you. This is a team effort. Nancy Winkensteer from San Diego Supercomputer Center, Yan Liu, who was spearheading this tutorial we had at the Terragood 2000 conference, Wisconsin-Madison. We had this half-day tutorial with 2 hours on this hands-on part. When we pulled together the online mapping based on spatial interpolation and taught folks how to work with the algorithms, with the middleware linking to backend Terragood resources, I think we received more than a few minutes standing applause in the end. That was not long after Google Map was available as services. So fast forward, coming to 2009, I was one of the beneficiaries of NSF Career Award program. And I was attempting to, again, picture this integration framework, including high-performance computing, data to knowledge transformation, visualization, and collaboration, community building. And in 2010, which was the year this software project was funded, I did a simple replacement of the computational intensity study with software integration. That literally led to the beginning of this NSF CyberGIS software research project. So using that diagram as an index, I'm going to focus on computational aspect, and then data aspect, and then visualization, and then community building collaboration. So computational innovation. Since this is a conference considering both CyberGIS and geodesign as two key themes, I'm going to use an example I thought is quite relevant to geodesign. You could characterize as a good geodesign example. This is a supply chain optimization for biomass, bioenergy distribution, a group led by Luis Rodriguez. You will hear from his work later today, collaborating with the CyberGIS project to figure out, in this national scope, how could you figure out where to put biorefinery facilities and storage facilities, and what is the transportation involved to move biomass to the different facilities. And the interesting thing here is that this is not a trivial computational problem. This is a hard optimization problem. In the back end, you would need to engage cyber infrastructure. But what's constructed in the front end, we hope to be an intuitive workflow for decision makers and stakeholders to come together to this common, we hope to be simple also interface, moving through the workflow. And this is a scenario: you have biomass produced in Illinois, but on the West Coast, California are demanding the biomass from Illinois. So it's a national scope exercise. And you see on the left, the computation was done interactively, although it was done through back-end cyber infrastructure resources. And you see different transportation routes. You will hear more technical discussions about how this was done and the scientific significance of this work from Luis and also Tao, who was working with Luis, now is a postdoc we co-supervise, and also Hao, a PhD student in my group. And on the right, you will see a pop-up soon to have interactive examination of the cost associated. Maybe that was already done earlier. I was right. So it popped up, see different proportions of the cost associated with the planning or design of such facilities. So a quite complex workflow we're hoping to simplify to a degree, not only for managing the access to back-end cyber infrastructure resources and services, but also to be able to present the complex decision-making workflow in a such intuitive sense. A very important thing to note in the end is all of the different parts of this workflow are noted in a wiki system so that the different domains experts could come together to contribute their knowledge, which is supposed to be dynamically evolving, because in a such decision-making scenario, it's hard to lock a piece of knowledge to be static. I think in the education realm, this is very true, especially in the education of cyber infrastructure. So we see these mechanisms coupled with this online app, in a sense, to facilitate knowledge sharing. Another example related to that is a different planning problem you all likely are familiar with. It's this political redistricting, this classic situation or problem, gerrymandering in North Carolina. I'm sharing this example because this is another geospatial optimization, which is heavily involved in geodesign. You're designing your life, your suits, or whatever to optimize something, right? So geospatial optimization is a critical computational process involved in geodesign. And in this particular case, an example like Minnesota, we know 8 districts will be divided up. And computationally, it's only feasible you work at county level through regular GIS tools support. But we know in real life, the redistrictings are happening at a very fine spatial scale, voting districts or even census tracts, blocks. On the right hand, this slide shows. I'm going to show you a novel algorithm based on genetic evolution concept or idea. and this paper shows technical details. But the idea is, if you think about genetic algorithm, its evolution of population, the fittest will survive. Normally, you have a large number of population instances to begin with. And the conceptualization here is we divide these populations into many, many subpopulations, just like in the real geospatial world. And these subpopulations are evolving relatively independently, but also exchanging their genetic makeups to facilitate better evolution. And this is a very good match to parallel computer architecture if you think of these hundreds of thousands of cores I was talking about in the current supercomputing environment and also in the future. So how do we engage spatial thinking to improve this kind of algorithmic design? If you are familiar with genetic algorithm, anyway, so the two parts of the table. The top part is your general parameters to specify. What we added was a bunch of parameters focusing on the exchange of subpopulations and also how do you enable the migrations. So these are very natural spatial thinking, but we infused this thinking into the algorithm design. Now, if you do that, we have a new genetic algorithm. On the left hand, these are some experimental runs, but on the right hand, there are production runs done on blue waters that starts giving you some configurations you would normally not able to see from your regular GIS or some simple algorithms you might employ to produce these plans. So benefits of thinking spatially for scalable computing in that sense is you have this number of processors increasing. We see desirably the finished value improvements is occurring. But also as you increase the number of cores, in that particular case it's 130,000 plus cores, you also see the number of new solutions emerged as one plot I showed you in the previous slide. So I was talking about you could have this opportunity of engaging spatial thinking. This could be for brain mapping, for instance, but I was using the genetic algorithm as an example to achieve scalable computing and therefore better results of geospatial optimization. I also want to emphasize an opportunity we have as we see the new parallel computing paradigm is going to stay, an opportunity to conceptualize geographical processes in parallel. If you look at our world, in fact, we see the world in geography is consisting of many parallel processes. They are spatially partitioned. So these are very naturally matching to the parallel computing environment. But for a long time, we've been working in GIS, for example, on sequential computing because that was our only option. And we were happy with that because of the Moore's law. We observed the performance increase. Now we are arm-twisted to change this concept, say, hey, we have a more natural mapping from the geographical phenomena to the computing environment. What do we do with it? I think there's a lot of innovation opportunities in this space. This will affect algorithm design. There will affect the basic formulations of GIS processes. And this is an example for agent-based modeling to have a hierarchical structure to capture on the higher level of the hierarchy the geospatial independence and the dependence, and on the lower level map the individual parts of the space onto massively parallel computing elements. If you do that, you have the potential to achieve such simulation that captures hundreds of millions of moving entities. And running such a simulation just for a few scenarios, you produce terabytes of data. So big compute also leads to big data. It's not just like big data needs big compute. So they're very much interlocked with each other. Well, how do we nurture the next generation data scientists, computational scientists in geospatial domain to be comfortable to thinking spatially and thinking in parallel. So this is an effort in our CyberGIS project. It's called the CyberGIS Toolkit, consisting of a loosely coupled set of building blocks in the software space. For example, parallel agent-based model. This is work done by Eric Schuck, used to be working with me, now graduated, started his independent career, and also map reprojection. This is an effort contributed by Mike Finn, leading a group. We're collaborating with Mike's group from the CyberGIS project to figure out how do you achieve scalable map data reprojection as data is becoming bigger. And we make this open source for those of us or students of us want to get into this space, understand the algorithms, they actually can get access to the details and documentation. And these are the tools tested on most of, or a good number of NSF supercomputer systems. You could download it to your smaller scale computing systems to play with. That should generally be okay. We certainly welcome your feedbacks if you run into any problems. Now switching gear a little bit, remember I was talking about a computational innovation. Now it's getting to the big data to knowledge transformation, which is the second aspect of the diagram I was sharing with you. An example is USGS, the National Map Program, has this new activity or new program, three-dimensional elevation program. We are collaborating with the Center of Excellence for Geographic Information Science, Lynn Ursuy's directing. And this is going to generate high-resolution, LiDAR-derived digital elevation model data. At raw data, we're talking about petabytes. How do you make such data available? How could you apply analysis, processing to such data? And how do you make such analysis and processing available to everyone? Every hydrologist, every GI scientist. I think we don't have that capability yet ready today. So an example would benefit from this program, 3DAP program, would be this digital elevation model toolkit focusing on hydrological information extraction. Again, David Tarboton, who will be speaking after me today, he's the one created this software package and has ArcGIS plugin as well. And I'm showing you a snapshot of workflow, not trying to test your vision, especially from back of the room, but just give you a sense of how complicated this is. If you have, say, 10 or a dozen gigabytes, you're running through all the steps of this workflow, you generate more than 10 times of more data from your input data. And let's look at this app. Similar interface coming to this CyberGIS gateway, you would be able to access it from cybergis.org. There's a button on the front page you would be able to click and then get to this app. Again, you might see this is similar to the Bioscope app I was showing you earlier, but the base map now is different. This is, for those of you who are familiar with GIS, it's a projection preserving area. And this is the national elevation data set. We're currently having access at 10-meter resolution, not the 3DAP data yet, which is in the works. And you see a workflow. I was selecting the stream network option. As you select multiple data products, and you see the workflow gets reflected. And you could get into different parts of the workflow and configure the parameters. So the big structure I was showing you now become these individual components, but very much data-driven, coming to the different parts of the structure. Again, that knowledge base is associated with this self-exploratory analysis workflow. You could get to the wiki. In fact, you saw this is updated by Dave Tarboton. And then once you are happy with all this configuration, you could submit your analysis. This is going to the Trestles supercomputer mentioned by Amy earlier. And you could do as many analyses you want, many different scenarios you want to simultaneously explore, and many users could come to this analysis simultaneously, because the assumption is by building this application on top of cyber infrastructure, we see cyber infrastructure provides unlimited computational power to end users. And this is a stream flow you could interact with, shows the network of the streams, and you could configure some symbology options there in an intuitive sense. And you could get back to other analysis you've done before, could look at them. You could also look at the workflow that was used. So this is the whole idea of provenance mentioned again in Amy's talk earlier today, because we are facing a tremendous challenge in scientific reproducibility. It's not only data, it's the process. And also these processes are running on cyber infrastructure. The access to the resources may not be replicated in an easy way either. So how do we capture this knowledge in a systematic fashion so that a community like us come together could make our science validated and reproduced? And similarly, we have work in the CyberGIS project. Wang Li from Arizona State University is pursuing understanding the provenance management in spatial econometric analysis. I was mentioning the resource we were using is coming from San Diego Supercomputer Center. And these results and computation are engaged through fast network, normally at tens of gigabits per second speed. I was talking about a big data transformed into knowledge for everyone. This means the traditional way of managing supercomputing resources are not going to satisfy the desirable interactivity coming from so many different CyberGIS users. So this is a piece of work we've investigated using cloud to provision high-end computing resources to achieve more desirable interactivity, such as I was showing you through the CloudDIM application. A collaboration with Kate Keehee at University of Chicago Argonne National Lab with her group. She's a cloud computing expert. Yet switching gear again to the theme of computing and data-intensive geospatial visualization. A study done 2 years ago, sponsored by SGI, which is one of the supercomputer vendors, as 10% of raw tweets coming to supercomputing conference floor, we were trying to show within a few minutes we could map out the distribution of people's opinions to the Sandy storm. So this was very fancy on the supercomputing conference floor. As Sandy was just after that after that event, the conference took place, and you saw there's sentiment analysis. We're collaborating with a group to understand what that was, but we were focusing on the heat mapping aspect. So this was also a similar example as Jack was talking about earlier today. As you get this very dynamic streams of data, how could you plug very slick, scalable analytics for making sense out of the data, but quickly transforming into actionable knowledge? Now, question was, how could we make such a capability to massive number of users? So I was showing you a movie. Could we come up with CyberGIS capabilities and approaches, allow all of us to be able to explore that stream of data, sort of hold the history? So this is a new project in the CyberGIS program, Move Pattern, to figure out what is the technical aspects for achieving that. The idea was, as tweeters moving around, they leave traces of their geospatial markers. And how do you figure out the patterns? at such massive scale, and also in a multi-scale way as you get into local, both global levels. And we learned yesterday from Esri colleagues talking about Hadoop and big data. So this is a very much an example along those research direction, a technical framework configuring Hadoop, managing movement data sets in space-time data model, and configuring front end to allow a large number of users to interact with such a stream of data and be able to have fun sometimes, perhaps. By this far, I have covered multiple modalities of cyber resources, oftentimes integrated in a cyber infrastructure fashion. And I also showed you some examples coming from advanced digital and spatial studies. So in the CyberGIS software research program we're executing, we're filling the gap. I mentioned CyberGIS Toolkit, which is a deep approach to computational and data science knowledge. And I showed you a couple of examples of CyberGIS Gateway, which is the CyberGIS for many, many users, for the mass. I have not talked much about how we achieved the integration among the cyber resources, heterogeneous hybrid cyber resources, but also enabling the toolkit and the gateway in adaptive fashion. So this is an architecture of the integration framework, GI-Solve. One particular angle I want to highlight is on the most right side, the collaboration and the participation. This is very much tied to our community engagement and build collaborative capabilities in the CyberGIS context. And this is the exact expertise we are fortunately to have access to in the project from Tim Niger's group working with Plenary. We are having some new features being incorporated into, for instance, CyberGIS Gateway to provide feedback mechanisms if we have users to have constructive or any feedbacks about any applications or capabilities of that environment that could be collected through a dynamic feedback collection process. But it's more broadly about this collaborative dimension, as we heard today from Amy's talk, and how do you infuse such capability and innovation for addressing very complex problems. Communities in CyberGIS are very diverse. Their communities are very interested in researching and advancing CyberGIS itself, but also their user communities. These are communities we have interacted with in the CyberGIS software program. And for the gateway capability, we have a worldwide distribution of users, registered users now over 1,000. You can see a lot of users coming from US, and but all 5 continents as shown on the top left. We're actively working with the mainstream off-the-shelf technologies such as ArcGIS Online. We have another session yesterday afternoon, learned about the newest progress made in ArcGIS Online, but this diagram prepared by a group of Esri colleagues showed nicely the interoperability between CyberGIS and ArcGIS Online, particularly in this case, CyberGIS Gateway. How I'm doing with the time, Don? Wow. And you saw the slide from advanced digital and spatial studies to the advanced cyber infrastructure and what's in the middle. What this means is we need a new generation of workforce that are going to bridge those 2 levels and also contribute to new fundamental knowledge in the middle. So this is just released today. We have 17 new CyberGIS fellows who are joining the CyberGIS project to develop new education materials for broad access by the communities. They are coming from 13 different institutions: computer scientists, geographers, GI scientists, urban planners. So as you heard today from Jack, this is going to be everybody roll up sleeves. There's no borders. and we're preparing very valuable and important knowledge for the next generation cyber scientists to benefit from. And these fellows will have joint appointments at the UIUC's CyberGIS Center for Advanced Digital and Spatial Studies, and also have access to resources at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. So we do whatever possible to bridge the gaps even in the cyber communities. To wrap up, I hope I have provided with you a few pointers with regard to scientific frontiers and applications CyberGIS represents. Don Wright and I co-organized this special feature on the PNNS a couple of years ago, focusing on CyberGIS-enabled scientific research and discoveries. And there's the other side of the coin is the science and technology of CyberGIS itself. As we learned earlier today from the keynotes, there are fundamental challenges about reliability of these cyber technologies and the space as they are interconnected with the geospatial tools and the GIS technologies. And I was talking about the reproducibility is another major challenge. And as you see the deep stack of cyber infrastructure itself, and it's evolving so rapidly, how could you achieve usability and also scalability? I think these are very exciting challenges because they represent also opportunities. There are special issue last year, but that was only scratching surface. I see a whole lot of exciting happenings potentially in this direction as well. So agencies, funds over the years we're very thankful for to allow us to have this much fun. And also the CyberGIS Center supported by multiple stakeholders on UIUC campus. And the people around me making me privileged every day and also just so much fun to have also every day. And thank you very much for your attention.
We have time for, we will take the time for a couple of questions for Shaowen.
All right.
Tim?
Is the door still open? Is anybody's hand up?
No, you're on.
Okay, Shaowen, you had a graphic, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but we're friends, right? We're my friends. So you had a graphic in there with the integration comments about, and you said we haven't done too much. And then actually you went on to a different topic, right? You did some stuff there. Can you characterize for where we're at in the community on the state of knowledge of integration? Where are we with regard to providing a solution? So we, in the project, I'm part of the project, and you've been after us to do this and so on. Where are we with the state of understanding for how integration occurs here? And you might preface that actually by starting out with what the approach we have been using for the past several years to get to where we're at. But we, I will say, don't necessarily have the answer at this point in time in terms of grand systematic solution to the nature of integration because it involves so much complexity out there. Could you speak to that?
Can you also
Summarize the question. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, I was showing, I think was the slide on GIS'14 as an integration framework. I was primarily talking about collaboration and community building. On that, Tim was following up with that to question me about whether we have made any progress on a systematic, overarching approach in the CyberGIS initiative moving forward. We've made some solid progress, largely through bottom-up approach in the past in the project with regard to registering services and registering apps, integration for primarily science-driven processes, like the apps I was showing. I think we've made solid preparation to think through this potentially systematic approach to integration in the CyberGIS context. But it's too early to say whether we have an optimal overarching systematic framework yet. Because although the building blocks is on the slide, but what's more important is the process. How could you characterize the different contributing elements in this contribution, including knowledge, processes, data, content, but coming together, serving different community needs, and in our case, primary interest is very major scientific progress. I think that process, we're still in the learning phase, but we've broken some ground to lay some bricks so that we could approach this process trying to understand what are the optimal ways to move forward.
All right, in the interest of time, we're going to actually thank Shaowen now for this excellent overview to get us launched further. So thank you very much, Shaowen.
Thank you.